Or I guess it's almost afternoon now. Hello, in any case. Hello, my name is Heather Downing, and I'm a developer advocate for Okta, which we're going to use a little bit today in showing you what it's like to do authentication with Azure as a third-party auth provider, and also what it's like to work in the real world. This is probably one of my favorite talks because of a couple of reasons. Who here thinks .NET Core is awesome? Anybody? Yes. Who thinks that the world currently runs on .NET Core? Exactly. So we're going to talk about what it was like to work in like .NET 4.5, 6, etc. in most of the real world. I've worked on a lot of projects before I came to Okta that used Web API. Anybody here used it before? Yes, a couple of you? Sure. Very cool. So when I started teaching my junior developers and onboarding some of the new people what to do for our API projects, I realized that there was kind of like a little bit of like a boot camp moment where like, okay, so here's the hello world stuff that you follow on the internet, and this is what it's really like to do this, right? Would you not agree that there's a little bit of a difference there? Yes. So what I'm going to kind of show you is just walk through what was pretty popular at the last company I worked at before I came to Okta, and show you a little bit about how I would go about that. Now, there are many different ways you can set up your ecosystem. There are different host providers, of course. That's why I made sure I was very descriptive with what exactly we're going to do here today. But also, please understand is that if you're an architect and you have done this many times before as integration, this may just be something that you're already familiar with. But what I discovered is that I had a lot of developers who'd never done this before. So this is definitely geared for completely beginners who have no idea what's going on, which, let's be honest, at some point in time, all of us were those people, right? Very cool. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we're going to go through today. The objectives are, I would create a ASP.NET Web API project. Now, in the case of many of my projects before, some of these already existed, okay? But in order to kind of onboard my person, I would have them build a new one so they understood the process. And then we would deploy it to Azure. Now, there's many different ways you can do this. I actually really appreciate some of the DevOps pipelines that are available to us now, but back when I started this, we didn't really have all of those available. So I wanted to show you a free option for this as well. And then profit. Ta-da. That's all it takes, right? That's it. Well, we only got an hour. If you can profit in an hour, you can take my job. What it really looks like is this. You create a repo, then you create a project, and then you deploy it to Azure with a quick publish, which you should only do once, by the way. You should never do that for the rest of the project, and we'll go through that. Then you should make some changes, and then you should set up continuous deployment. Okay? I'm going to use GitHub. We used Bitbucket before. I'm sure some of you may have private repositories set up as well, but GitHub is just the easiest for me to demonstrate today. Then you see what broke. This is what really happens, right? Then you're like, okay, so now we set this out, what broke, right? Then we're going to set up our basic CRUD endpoints. I'm just going to give you an example one, but of course, if you're familiar with REST, which at this point you absolutely should be, then I'm just going to give you a sample for that. Then we're going to redeploy it and see what broke. Right? Then we're going to secure the API access with Okta because, of course, I work for Okta. You could certainly do this with other providers like Entity Server or Auth0 or, of course, anything built in. But, of course, I want to kind of show you how cool it is to use our products. So I'm going to do that today. And then we're going to redeploy and see what broke again. Right? Then I'm going to create API client access credentials. Since this is machine-to-machine stuff we're talking about today, there is not going to be any formal sign-on that you're going to see like you would if you logged into a website. This is something that, let's pretend, for example, you are a car company, and there are lots of different integrations that are starting to happen with your vehicle. Let's say maybe voice, etc., and you want to hand client credentials to the company that's working on this. So this is how you would set that up inside of Okta to hand to somebody else to consume your API that you're building right here. Make sense? Which is not something I get to see very often. Usually it's, here's how to build an API that you use internally, but what about if you want to use it externally? Or maybe just in a different department and you don't want to give them access to, your entire code repository, right? So this is what we're going to set up for that. Then we're going to test it out, and then we're going to profit. So a little bit different, right, than just the top three. I was told that creating a REST API is one of the easiest things in the world. I totally disagree. I think it's really fun and I really enjoy it because it's pure data transformation and delivery, right? That's something I enjoy. Pushing pixels is for very talented people that you should also go and see today. But for me, this was something that was really interesting to me. So we're going to try to do all of this here, okay, within an hour. So please give me a little bit of your patience, and we're all going to put on our group debugging hats in case anything happens, right? Cool. Okay, has anybody here in the room ever used Okta before? Okay, like a couple of you? Great. This is going to come a little bit later in the process, but I was just interested in anybody who's tried it. I also am the .NET advocate specifically, so if you go to developer.okta.com and look at our blog, I'm usually authoring a lot of our .NET content, and I do a lot of work specifically in framework and for 5.4.6 because, again, most of the enterprise world still runs on it, so it's important to have that. But of course, if you're interested in how to migrate to .NET Core, we've got that in there for you too. Any questions before I begin about what we're covering? No? If you don't want to cover this, there's wonderful other talks you can also watch. Okay, cool. So we're going to create a repo, right? All right, so this is the very first thing that I drilled into my junior developer's head is that you have to do this first. Because if you don't do this first, you're not going to do it. Like, this is what's going to happen. I've had too many beginning projects being lost because of one reason or another, so you should just get in the habit of creating a repo from scratch, okay? So in order for us to do that, right now I've created a repo just as a once everything's out of the oven moment in like a cooking show. It's already been created here. But if I were to just log into my GitHub repo, I can go ahead and sign in here and create a new one. So this is what I have everybody do when they start. Cool. And I've got many in here, and they're all public for a reason, because I want you to be able to see like the different iterations of things that I have done. So if you want to create a repo from scratch, let's go ahead and create a new one. I don't know, let's just call this the real NDC London. The real NDC London I have discovered is all the hallway conversations that we have after the talks, right? Yes, to what we learn from each other. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm making it public for you all. Of course, you can make it private if you'd like. And you should always initialize it and create. Cool. So now that we created that, hooray. What would you do with this? Since we know our host provider already is going to be Azure for this example, again, it could be Azure AWS. You could have your own on-prem. I'm going to go ahead and set things up inside of the Azure portal. Now, has anybody here used the Azure CLI tool before? It's pretty cool, right? I think it's cool. But unfortunately, to wrap your head around it, usually I have to walk my junior developers through what it's like to actually go into the portal and see it. And then, of course, they can go from there and use any scripting tools that they want, like Pulumi or Terraform, to set up new instances. Okay. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and log into my app services here and create a new app service. Now, you can also do this directly in Visual Studio. Has anybody done that before? A couple of you? Okay. Well, not everybody likes to do that. Sometimes you want to set up like specific subscriptions that you already have or existing resources groups. This is the moment where you discover exactly how much power the engineering department has versus, sysadmin and DevOps. 9 times out of 10, if you're doing a large enterprise situation, you're not going to be able to do this. You're going to have to ask specifically for this instance to be set up, okay? So while it's really great to be able to do a file new project and then go ahead and push it directly from Visual Studio, usually you have to get authorization to do that. Now, has anybody here actually been able to be judge, jury, and executioner for all of their projects at their work? Anybody? 1, 2, 3 people. Yes. So maybe you all understand that this is a moment where you're definitely going to need to pull in a decision maker. For this, I'm going to go ahead and just call it Real NDC London. Let's see if it does it. Yeah, cool. We've got it. It's resource group. For the runtime here, of course, I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and use, let's use v47. That'll be good. And I've got a couple of hosting plans in here that I'm going to select. This is a little bit of an interesting moment for those of you who have not done a whole bunch of Azure deployments. What you decide here and how you decide to build your code has a large impact onto your monthly bill to your company. So it's really important that you spend a little bit of time deciding exactly how many calls and maybe gate how like or throttle how many calls somebody can do when you're handing them client credentials for your API, because that can definitely impact this. Okay, so they can review and create it from here. Ooh, did I do something wrong? Of course I did. Oh, they don't like that. Let's do something different. I'm gonna make it nice and long. That's what you do with your passwords, right? Make it nice and long. Cool. All right, now we're gonna create that. All right, so while that's being exciting, I'm gonna go ahead and go back to creating a new project. Let's see. So we created a repo, right? We did that. Now we're going to create a web API project. Cool. That deployment's underway. Let's multitask. Okay. I'm going to create a new one here. Cool. Okay, so who here is currently working in .NET Framework? I'm interested. Okay. So like half the room. It's pretty cool. The rest of you, welcome. This is what the rest of us are doing. Please understand, I love how forward-thinking everything is in open source and how much the .NET community is moving forward. That's part of why I'm part of the .NET Foundation. But it's important to not leave behind the really good coding projects that we have in Legacy. And so that's part of why, again, I'm choosing to do this instead of the newest and brightest thing. Okay, so let's call it Real World API NDC London. Okay, cool. I think I got everything here. I'm in 4.2. Okay, select REST API. Now, because I'm going to do authentication with Okta, I don't need to set up the authentication right here. You can just leave that off. Okta's going to handle it with OAuth 2 as an external auth provider. Make sense? We good? Okay, cool. You're probably the most attentive crowd I think I've ever had for this, so thank you for being awake. Cool. So that's going. Let's check and see and how our Azure. Okay, cool. Looks like that's getting good. Deployment's over here underway. But don't worry, I have the patience of a gnat, so if I need to, I'll switch to my pre-baked cake project if I need to. All right, so now we've got a solution. Terrific. There's something that's in here. Great. Excellent. But what I really need to do is I need to hook this up into our GitHub repo, right? There's a couple of different ways you can do this. I use git bash all the time, just command line. But again, whenever I'm teaching, I prefer to use visual methods because part of the reason I fell in love with doing .NET is because of the visual aspect of Visual Studio. And so I appreciate that there are buttons and menus. It isn't always an option to remember everything. You all probably have excellent memory, but some of us have very small caches that get flushed often. And so it's important to be able to show both ways. So I'm going to show the easiest way possible. For me, there's a couple of different connections you can do here. I'm going to go ahead and connect to GitHub here. I think it's this one. Isn't this fun? Doesn't it feel like a Twitch stream? All right, so now that I'm there, let's see. I think I've got everything here. It connected, right? Did it not connect? Well, if it's going to give me a problem, let's sign in with the browser. I'm signed in, so WTH. Let's see. I think I should be all in there. Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm all in there, right? Have you tried turning it off and on again? Yeah, no, that's all right. If it's going to be a problem, it's fine. I can go to the pre-baked cake, it's fine. because your time is valuable. So we're going to go over here to my Team Explorer here. Right. So I'm currently on the Real World Guide API repository. Of course, I created a new one, but if I were to create one and connect to it, this is where I push it directly into there, okay? So you can connect it through Visual Studio again, or you can use the Bash tool as well. I'm going to go ahead and make a change so I can prove that it's connected to GitHub, okay? So let's go ahead and say, because you are awesome. Don't pretend like you've never done a commit like this. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that, sync it, and let's not forget to push it, because why would there be one button for all of those things? Okay. All right, so that's initializing the push. I'm going to go ahead and pop over to my repositories here. Sorry about that. Cool. All right. Because you're awesome. There. So now we can agree that we are connected in our code and all of our changes, right? So if you notice here, I've got kind of a basic Git call. Okay, there's a lot of other things, but as you can see, that I have other things that don't matter down and it's hidden inside of that region. The whole purpose of this is just to give you an idea of how to do the basics, and a Git request is probably the easiest way to start with a REST API. Cool. So what I've got here, I want to make sure I'm not completely off track. We're going to deploy it to Azure. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that you, of course, can do deployments. I have a very good friend of mine that absolutely hates what I'm about to do. But again, if you let's just say you just set up a new project and you made one change to the basic templated web API project, right? Which is what we basically did. I just added a nice little return in a string for a test, right? So then you can right-click and publish, and go from here and make sure to connect to whatever Azure portal is. Now again, this right here requires that you have admin permissions to do this. Something that's helpful, I've discovered, is that if you're going to do a new project, you can set up your own kind of test Azure account and push it here, and then make sure everything works. It's something that you can control that's specifically tied to your credentials. And then once everything works, all you have to do is ask for an instance to be created, and then connect your GitHub to whatever you're going to deploy with your enterprise sysadmin. Okay? You all following me? Great. Cool. So I would just at this point publish this out there, which always takes a minute because we're on fantastic internet. All right, cool. Well, that's going. We want to make sure we can actually hit this. So I personally use Postman. Does anybody have another like API testing tool they like to use? What? Yes, CodeVerse Client works really well. Anybody else have any others? Anybody remember Fiddler? Yes, use that for many years. But appreciate it though. As part of the reason that I use Postman is it's agnostic. I can use it between all my JavaScript developers and all of my PHP developers. We all understand how to use the tool. So it's part of the reason that I chose that one. And so it looks like right now something is happening. We are seeing spinny bars. Another way, yay, so it looks like this one out there. I always check my API tab to make sure it does. Cool. Yep, my API test is there. Excellent. Cool. So, of course, I wanted to set this off and make sure that it all works. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and see if that works. Ta-da, NDC London. So we see that our changes are made and the host is out there. Great. Now you have to make some changes, and then we have to set up CI/CD. Well, we already did that, right? Or did we? We only set up our repo. We haven't set up continuous integration for our host provider. And this is something that we always wait till the last minute on a lot of these projects to do, which is a mistake. So please do it early and do it often. So the way we're going to start doing that is we're going to go into that instance that we created. I'm going to go back here and take a look at this service. Okay. And if anybody's interested, by the way, in me just doing a complete Azure CLI tool demo of this, just ping me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to put it up on our YouTube channel, just to do that way as well, and to do one using something like Terraform or Pulumi. Okay, so the way that I'm going to set this up is I'm going to have this connect to our GitHub account, so any changes that I do will automatically be pushed to Azure. Okay, so for that, we're going to go to the deployment center here. And you'll notice that I've already had several in here, but I'm going to disconnect them and reconnect them so that you can walk through this. What's neat is that Microsoft has gotten better and better about offering good DevOps tools to people, some of which, of course, you have to pay for. But again, if I want to show someone just the basics of how to do this for free, not only can you use GitHub Actions. Has anybody used GitHub Actions yet? Well, there's a great talk on GitHub Actions here at Entity London you should definitely go to. But for those of you who are saying, hey, I don't have the budget yet to set up Azure pipelines, et cetera, or Azure DevOps, there's another option in here for you. And we'll see if any of you know about it. So I'm going to set up my continuous deployment with GitHub here and continue. And I'm going to use Kudu. Has anybody used Kudu before? It's like 3 of you. Yes, did you know that this works? So all this does is it automatically builds your code during deployment with no additional configuration. So it just looks at the diff between what's going on in your GitHub account and then deploys that. Okay? Cool. Now, since I logged in with my GitHub account earlier when I was setting this up, I'm going to go ahead and select that one. I also have another one for our Okta developers, but this is the one that you would see if you went to my repository. And let's go ahead and pull that. It was the real world API, right? Yes, real world guide API. I think it's this, or was it web API? Real world guide API, yep. Right? Yes. Okay. And I'm just going to select the master branch. Now, this is a moment where it becomes very obvious that you don't have a branching strategy set up. That is something that definitely you can have a discussion. Again, for this, I'm just going to go ahead and go with the default master, but of course you can set up things for dev, you can set up things by feature, request, etc. So now I'm going to finish that, setting it up, and now anytime I do anything inside of my code and I push it to GitHub, it will automatically redeploy. Okay, as long as I push it there, it'll take a look at it, which is pretty cool. So that's what it's doing right now. And now we have continuous integration set up. That was pretty easy, right? Not too bad. That's the last check-in message, if you'll notice that I did. So let's go ahead and prove that we can make another change and have it automatically deploy without me doing a quick publish directly in Visual Studio. And then I'm from Kansas City. All right, so now that I have that set up, I'm just going to check it in. I'm just going to save that as Super Bowl, commit all of that, sing it, and push. Real world people is waiting. All right. It says that it pushed it. I'm just going to double check that here, make sure that it did. Yep, Super Bowl is there. So let's see if anything's actually happening over here. So look, it's already running the deployment command right there. You can see, and it says that it's already grabbed it. So right now, has anybody figured out exactly how long it takes your app service instance to restart on Azure? Approximately 30 seconds to a minute, I've discovered. It depends, of course, entirely on where it is. Clearly, I have this instance in North America instead of Europe, which I should have done instead, probably be a little bit faster for me. This is just something I've noticed. So if you do this and you instantly try to hit your endpoint, then, of course, it's going to just take a minute. All right? So we're going to go ahead and pull this up and see if it's there. Sometimes if it sits there and spins, it means it's still grabbing it. But ideally, I made no other changes except for text. So yeah, see, it looks like it's still building. So I'm going to cancel that for a second. See if it'll find it now. Hooray. All right. I know Super Bowl is probably not exciting to you people, but we haven't gone in a long time. So it's very exciting for us. Okay. All right. So now that we have everything set up there, we see what broke. Luckily for us, I only made a textual change, so clearly nothing really broke. We can set up our credit endpoints, which we did, and then redeploy and see what broke. And then we have to secure the API because hacking is real. Very true. So this is something that also I noticed was a common problem, is that we didn't set up any sort of authentication whatsoever when we were building APIs. And or extending the ones you've got. And so I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit of that now and talk to you what it means to do things after the fact. Okay. I'm going to pull this up. Okay. How many of you are familiar with auth 2? So you guys can teach this for me then. Thank you very much. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to showing you what it's like to set up a REST API, like secured application inside of Okta, and then go ahead and secure what we have here. With me? Cool. Okay. If you go to developer.okta.com, you can get a free account forever. It's free for the life of however long you want to keep that account open. You get users included is about 1,000 for free, and I think it's about 5,000 inactive users, so these are 1,000 active users. It's enough to go through and do a proof of concept and then go from there in terms of pricing. I'm not a salesperson, I'm just here to show you how it works. But anyway, if you were to log in, this is the dashboard as you would see it as soon as you land, okay? So now, it's pretty easy to set things up, but I want to go ahead and go over a couple of things with you. One is our authorization server. You get one by default. As soon as you create an account, you get this one right here, the default authorization server. It's pre-created for you with an audience and an issuer ID. Now, because I decided to have a named instance for my Okta account, mine is coreline.okta.com, but yours will probably look something like dev-57892.okta.com. Okay, it looks something like that until you decide to do a named version of this, okay? And so that's the same thing. The issuer URI is just what you're going to use to do any requests to Okta for access. Now, this, of course, this API doesn't necessarily need any users. We're just securing it with client credentials, okay? So for that, we're going to go to Applications here, the top tab, and Add Application, okay? Notice you've got several options here. You've got any sort of mobile integration, a SPA, or a regular website that you might be used to, like that has a front end. So it could be like a web forms site, it could be a .NET Core site, etc. But we're going to use machine to machine because I love APIs. So we're going to use this as an example. And then you're just going to name it here. So because the consumer of this is what you want to name it. So this is something where if you're going to set something up for maybe another department or somebody that wants to consume your API, then you would set this up for them. This is a specific set of credentials for them to hit your API with. Okay, follow me? So for this, I'm going to have Postman be my consumer. Okay, that's the one that's going to be the example. Of course, you also could take those same client credentials in code and hit the API as well, but I'm just going to show it to you in Postman. Okay, so for that, I would do like Postman and then whatever it's called, Your World API NEC London, for example. Once you're done, it will automatically generate a set of client credentials with an ID and a secret here, and that's it. This is all that you really need to secure anything. It's automatically generated for you by Okta. And manage there too. So you can come in here or you can use our CLI tool and you can reject things like that based on monitoring how much they're using your API. If they're really slamming it because you have a great Star Wars API with all of the information about the new film and there's too many requests are coming in, you also can come in here and just shut off accounts that individually have your credentials, okay? So what you would do here is you would take the client ID and the client secret, and you would go into this account, okay? So in order for this to be tested out to work, I have to do something really important. I have to add Owen to my Web API project. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Owen. Yes, very cool. There's lots of ways to do it. I'm just gonna go ahead and take a look at our startup CS and show you what I've done here. It's not that much. It just looks like it because I'm scrolling. So I'm going to go through each line for you, all right? Because I care about keeping secrets actually secret, instead I will use Azure to hold some configurations for me. Specifically would be like what my endpoint is going to be to hit inside of Okta and the audience. That's your authority and your audience, okay? In order to put those inside of Azure, I'm going to go ahead and pop back over here and show you what that's like. You're going to go down to configuration under settings for your app service. Notice that there you'll get a website node default version in there already, and I went ahead and added a new application setting here. And you can kind of show these values here. So you would just add a new application setting, call it whatever you'd like, add the value, and then that key and value is stored inside of Azure instead of being checked into your repository and revealed. We all think that we know that this is something we should do, but I promise you there was no enterprise project that I touched that did not already have secrets checked into a GitHub repo. So please remind all your developers this is something that can be done instead, is that this can be held in the Azure App Vault or right here directly in the Azure App Service settings, okay? So in here, I'm just gonna go ahead and click to show you the values. That's what I've added here. I know it's a little small, see if I can I go in anymore? No, I cannot. I'm sorry. Let me make it happen. Yeah, whoa. You guys, hopefully you can see that a little better. But if you notice right here, this is my authority. So this is whatever domain I have whenever I created that developer.okta.com account. It gave me coreline.okta.com because I set it up as a named instance. And all you do is you append OAuth 2 and default as the scheme, okay? Any questions? We're good? Excellent. Then the audience is going to be my server identification. I'm going to use the default one that comes out of the box with Okta, so that's why I put that there, okay? Cool. I'll put this back to normal. All right, I'm going to go back here. So that's where these are going to come from. It's going to go directly into the app settings for Azure and inject them right here, okay? The next is we're going to take a look at adding OpenID Connect or IDC. Has anybody used OpenID Connect in the room? Okay, fair number of you, awesome. So this is a pretty common way to set up your Web API project to add that and do just basic retrieval of that. So that's what we're doing here, setting up the configuration manager and the discovery document. Then we're going to use JSON Web Token Bearer Authentication. All sorts of fancy. Do you remember when things were just a little bit less complicated than they are now? Yes, I do, but I've been coding a minute. Okay, our authentication mode is just going to be active, and then we're going to set up how we're going to create the token validation parameters here. We're going to use the audience and authority values that we set earlier in the method and return the signing keys from the discovery document, okay? And of course, I'm going to, this came out of the box by default. I did not change that. The only thing I did change, though, is that I changed from an XML formatter to a JSON formatter, and I changed the camel casing, okay? That's all I did here. So this is all I really had to do for startups.cs. Again, if you're interested in this, we have a specific, and I'll go ahead and link it to you at the end, a specific blog post that does exactly what we're doing today, if you'd like to go on your own and do this. Cool. Web config, notice I set that up right there. And now all I have to do is use a very important piece. If you look, I've got a couple of different things added here. And I'm going to add the almighty authorize attribute. Okay? So I'm just using the built-in principal library for .NET in order to do this. And so now that I've added this, I'm going to go ahead and commit it. added authorize attribute. I'm going to commit that, sync it, and push. This is a kind of a fun moment back and forth, and it encourages incremental pieces of code instead of large bodies of code to go in for our pull requests, etc. Of course, I didn't set up a pull request here, but you certainly could through GitHub. Cool. That says that I already pushed it. Make sure that's good. I think what I love most about this talk is that we're actually building something here. It's kind of fun. And it's not super flashy. It's just like this is what we get to do all the time when we're actually working. Cool. So it looks like this pushed. I'm going to take a look at the deployment center and see if it grabbed it. It did. So if you notice, it actually timestamps it as well. You can pull these values out in a log file if you're ever interested in how often things are being published to Azure. And now, because I added this authorize attribute, what do you think will happen if I hit it with Postman? Any guesses? Let's see. So I'm just making sure that I have nothing in here. I have no access token. I have given it nothing, right? All right, so theoretically, once it builds, hopefully it's built. Has it built yet? Maybe not. I'm gonna give it a second. Push. So far, it's been pretty good in terms of publishing for me, so I've been pretty happy. That's exactly what I expect to see. So we have a 401 because I don't have authorization to see that endpoint, okay? So this is what would happen if I didn't want just anybody to hit my Star Wars API, you know? And so instead, they have to register with me or ask me and request a set of client credentials in order for them to hit their API, right? So to do that, we are going to give them the credentials that you set up for Postman, right? Here, okay? So all I'm gonna do is just copy that here. And you can do the same with the client secret. Inside of Postman, of course, you can certainly do this in code from whatever consuming application you have set up. Let's say you are a PHP developer and you want to hit my API. That's great. But this is just easier to show anybody who has any sort of coding background whatsoever. I will go over to the authorization tab inside of Postman here and make sure that the type is set to OAuth2 because that's what we're using. Data set to request headers, and then I'm going to click Get New Access Token here. And I kind of preset this up so you all can see it, but we just created a new piece of client credentials, right? So I'm gonna add that there, grab the client secret, add that there, and now I'm gonna be able to request a token. You will notice something right here under Scope called Manage Lists. Okay. This is required for any sort of an API call where you have larger bodies of data coming in. And you add that scope by going to Authorization Servers here under API inside of Okta, going into your default server, going to Scopes, and you can add scopes here. For example, I added another one called API Scope for another project for my default server. You don't have to have a one-to-one relationship with your servers versus your applications. As you can see, I actually use this authorization server for a couple of different applications. It depends on your company's policy and what you'd like to do. And it doesn't cost you any more to have extra authorization servers. But right here, you'll notice Manage Lists is right here. Okay, so I added that in order to provide the ability to hit an API with large amounts of data. Okay, any questions? We're okay? Good, so that's what I added here as a scope, okay? I set as a basic auth header here, grant type is client credentials, and I just gave this a name, so it's easy for me to keep track of. I'm gonna request the token here, and you can request more than one. You can have a list of them that you can toggle between in Postman. I'm gonna use the token, and now that I have this, it's set up here, right? It's inside of there. Switch back over to the body and send and see if I actually can hit it now. There we go. So you should automatically get that 200. That was pretty easy to set up. You didn't have to create any of that authorization stuff from scratch. All you did was create an instance for the person or company that wanted to consume it, right? Pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. So what have we done? I think we've actually gone through creating access credentials, and we've tested it out. Do you think there's anything left? Yes. Profit. So within the span of time that I've been here, we did kind of everything from scratch as a beginner would have to understand how to do it. In order for someone to create an API that is actually monitored, actually has CI/CD, has a repo set up for it, has authentication set up for it, and tested out whether or not it is consumable by an authenticated source. That's not too bad, right? I think it's pretty good. If you're interested in what this is like, even in more fleshed out situations, we've got more videos on our YouTube to kind of show you how to do this. But what I like probably the most about this particular one is that it's meant to be simple. We have a lot of complicated situations we're already going to tackle in code, and this gives you just a basic walkthrough and what it's like and how you should think about things from beginning to end when you're starting a project that's in .NET Framework. So if you have any questions for me, let me know. Otherwise, stay curious. Thank you.